Okay, you've got one more cosmic dance next week, then you've got your graduation, and probably after that, unless any of you are absolutely fanatical about having one, I'll stop doing them, because people tend to sort of disperse. So I'll leave it completely up to you if I do any more. And I don't mind at all, I won't burst into tears if you don't want any more. And tonight's one is exciting because it's got a really controversial subject I'm going to speak about, which is the subject of free will. And also Margaret asked for some more about the ego, that whole concept. And it fits in really well because you can't talk about the free will subject without establishing whether you exist or not, and to whom does free will apply. So, thank you, Miranda, for asking your question, and thank you, Margaret, for your question. And just to go into the ego thing, it's such a simple thing, but it gets massively misunderstood, and particularly in different religious and esoteric traditions, ego gets a terribly bad press. And the best explanation for it I've come across is in the classical Advaita tradition, as explained by the original Sri Shankara in his book Crest Jewel of Wisdom, or the Crest Jewel of Discrimination. And what that is, it's called, in Sanskrit, I translates as aham, and that translates as idam. So in a normal state of affairs, you have an I, and then everything outside your I is that. So you have aham is I, and idam is everything which is not I. So in a normal state of affairs, sort of mind-body mechanism is I, and that is everything that lies outside of it. So with Advaita, they have a concept called ahamkar, or ahamkara. And aham is I, and kar means vehicle. So in India they have temples, and each temple has a great big wooden structure with great big wheels and lots of deities on it, and that's known as a car, K-A-R. So you have, and that's where our word car comes from. So you have a motor car, or you have an ahamkar. And an ahamkar is your vehicle for your sense of I. So in Advaita, your ahamkar it can either be pure or impure, they call it. So if you think all aham means is I, or like in Latin, I is ego or ego, however you want to pronounce it. So there's absolutely nothing wrong at all, absolutely nothing with the concept of I, or ego, or ego. I remember in Collett House years ago, it was very peculiar, no one would ever say I, they all said one used to be told. They always used the word one, and it sounded so ridiculous because they were all trying to have no egos, and they all ended up sounding like BBC sort of 1950s people. And some still do it to this day. They'll say one used to be told by Mr. Uspensky. So it's strange that how it becomes distorted. So with the concept of ahamkar, you have your basic sense of I amness, which is the thing which lies behind your thoughts and your feelings. So when you're 5 years old, there's something looking out for your eyes, which is exactly the same as when you're 60 years old, and probably when you're 90 as well. It doesn't change, it's totally ageless, and it's fully formed, it's fully functioning, there's nothing whatever in the way of it. There's no obstructions, there's no blockages, and all the time it's looking out, and that's pure consciousness, pure aham. And my thing, which is looking out, is exactly the same as your thing. In fact, I've done a brand new esoteric diagram which shows it's like a sort of multi-version of this diagram, and I put the eye at the centre and the different levels going out, and I've written down at the bottom 7 billion radii, because I looked out how many people there are currently living on the earth, and apparently it's 7 billion. But then it's more than that. You've got to take in all the earwigs and all the snow leopards and all the lions and all the grizzly bears and everything. So it's all at its centre, it's all the same consciousness manifesting through all these different multiple billions of vehicles. So from that point of view, everything is one thing, yet it manifests through a different vehicle. Okay, so if you imagine a little one of those radii is this diagram here. So with ahamkar, consciousness manifests through the 3 levels, causal, subtle and physical. So all of these are I. So that side, that side, that side and that side. But if you say, I'm my physical body and that's all I am, then that's called ahamkar, that's called false ahamkar, because you're identifying your sense of self with the vehicle. So you're saying, I'm just a vehicle, rather than identifying with the consciousness of which your body is a vehicle. And also, anything you can observe is ultimately not I. So you can observe your physical body and you can cut sort of fairly large portions of it off and it keeps on functioning. So it's very necessary, it's a lovely thing, it's there for the manifestation in the dance and for experiencing all the wonders of creation. But if you identify solely with that, then that's called false ahamkar or false I, because you're limiting who you are. And same with the subtle body or psyche. If you identify just with your psyche and your body, then that's also known as false I or false ahamkar. So in the esoteric traditions, that's really what they give the name ego to when they use it in a slightly derogatory way. But it's not derogatory at all, and it only limits you if you identify your sense of self and you limit it just with those. Also you suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune if your identity just stays there, because then you're sort of a bit like a leaf in the wind and you go up and down according to what goes on in your particular movie. If you're observant, you'll notice there's an awareness of both your thinking and your feeling, as well as your physical body. So, as I said, behind your thinking and your feeling is this silent thing which silently witnesses what goes on in both those worlds. So your sense of I can be narrow, or it can expand and expand and expand. And it's not that anything changes. You don't have to develop anything or do lots of arduous exercises. You can if you want to. But all that happens is you notice that already you are this, you already are the great stillness as well as all this. So that's called real I, or true ahamkar, and limiting with just a part of it is what's called false I or false ahamkar, or in the esoteric traditions or religious traditions, it sometimes gets called ego. So having a big ego isn't necessarily thinking that you're a wonderful person down at this level and you're better than everyone else. It could just as well be thinking that you're very insignificant and miserable down at this level. But it's thinking that you're separate and you're a separate doer. So that's the meaning in the esoteric traditions of ego. It doesn't matter whether your opinion of yourself is inflated or deflated. So even if you're very humble and you flagellate yourself all the time, it's still what they call false ahamkara or false I. So realizing that you are the great oneness and you are not separate and you're not a separate doer of your actions. But before you can realize that, you have to understand and notice that you are everything and you are this great stillness that lies behind both body and psyche. Does that explain ego, Margaret?
For some really strange reason, I have a hard time processing this.
Yeah.
It's like I have some sort of block,
Yeah.
which I can't explain.
Yeah.
I just feel thick.
Yeah.
So when you start describing this, I just start feeling thick.
Yeah.
And I kind of want more detail, or I
Yeah.
want to be able to get it.
Yeah.
I can get the I am everything and I'm the witness. You know, I understand without thinking sort of what you're saying about the different levels. But then my thinking brain engages and I start thinking, how would I explain that to anybody? And I can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does
Sort of
make
like
sense.
I intuitively get it, but I can't.
Yeah. That's why in the Uspensky tradition they had this thing called knowledge and being, where being was really the degree to which you become a transparent vehicle for this. So it's your deep sense of I am. And so it's like presence. Some people call it presence. Some people have more presence than other people, and it's almost like the degree to which this flows through you. So you sort of have an inner light that comes out behind your eyes almost. But it was said you need knowledge as well, simply because if someone asks you to explain it, and then you'll be stymied. But what I think happens in the journey of life is you experience everything and you observe what's going on, and then you gradually, as you go through life, you're sort of led to see the true nature of reality, and then it comes out as your own direct experience. And when it's your direct experience, then it comes out in your own words and you can explain it. If it's only been read about, then you're going to quote Mr. Uspensky or Ken Wilber or Yogananda or whoever in their words. But when it goes right in and then comes out again, then it comes out in your own direct experience. I'll go into it more as we go along. But, sorry.
I just said thank you.
Okay. In Sufism, someone else asked a question on Facebook, was how do you die before you die? And in Sufism they have a saying, die before you die so that you will not taste death. And my understanding of that, and it very much relates to the Makabale, is living life not solely in this area. So when you're dancing in life, it's very important that you have a really healthy sense of ego. Where's Lonnie? There you are. We've discussed this. The pre-rational states have to be very healthy and fully developed for you to approach the trans-rational. So you need a healthy sense of I, and if your development gets damaged through trauma at a very young age, you often need therapy, different sorts of therapy to help you with that. If not, going into the transrational can become a means of avoiding issues which have been bypassed down here. So with Die Before You Die, my understanding is it's like when you're living life, you're fully in this, you're fully dancing, you're fully playing your role in life, but you have a background awareness of the great stillness which lies behind it all. So it's sometimes described as two wings of a bird. You have the active outer in life wing, but you have an awareness in the background of the great stillness and what the nature of life is, and that it's at the end of the day it's all just a drama or a play, and you are the stillness. So the more you do that, some teachers call it contemplating the I am. I think Nisargadatta called it contemplating the I am. It's just this awareness of what is looking out, but it's just pure beingness. You don't even think about it. It's more a sensation or a feeling, yet it's not a feeling, but it's an awareness of that. And the more you're aware of it, at first it's like this is the foreground and this is the background, but as life goes on, gradually the background becomes the foreground. So it's like the great stillness spreads and envelops everything. So it's like you're looking out from the great stillness and not just in the peripheral. So that's a bit more about it. I won't give you too many words. Dance in the macabre and see what happens. Now the next one is the Miranda subject, and I really shy away from this one because it's almost guaranteed to send people off on one. The way I'm going to describe it is, first I want to tell the Rumi story again about the ants on the piece of paper. So remember, Rumi has a story in the Masnavi how there's this bit of paper and there's a pen writing on it, and there are some ants on the paper, and they see the pen writing, and one ant says, "Isn't it wonderful that the pen can do this writing?" And another slightly wiser ant says, "No, it's not the pen which is writing, it's the hand which is moving, which is holding the pen." And another even wiser ant says, no, it's not the hand, it's the arm which is moving the hand which is holding the pen which does the writing. And then the ants go sort of back and back in the chain of causality until one very wise ant says, no, the writing is caused by none of these things. The writing is caused by the universal spirit that gives movement to all things. So I always immediately think of this diagram of the ants, because I think of the pen down there and the hand there and the arm there and then the universal spirit here. And in Sanskrit they have a term which is called viveka, or discrimination, and in Buddhism they call it prajna, which is also wisdom. And wisdom or viveka is the ability in your understanding to go back and back and back in the chain, the causal chain. So in terms of doership, you're not attributing the doership to just the physical body. So if I lift my arm, for instance, I might say, isn't it wonderful I can lift my arm? That's like the ant saying, isn't it wonderful, the pen on the paper? And then you go back into psyche, so I had the thought to lift my arm. And then it's like Einstein's thing, what about the will to will the will? So there's always another bigger will behind your ability to will. So using the ant analogy, you just go back in your thinking, in your understanding, and acknowledge the cause, which is the ultimate cause, which has no cause. So it's sometimes called the causeless cause. With, again, going back to ego, in the esoteric traditions, the ego is attributing the writing to just the body or the psyche. Using Viveka, you realize that the inspiration is arising from somewhere beyond you as an individual. So all the time these inspirations are coming down and manifesting. Somewhere there's a wonderful Rumi quote I had, and I've lost it. This one about the lion. Spirit manifests as form like the lion coming out of the jungle. I like that, bearing in mind the lion over there. So, now I'm just going to sort of jump across to my own life and use it as an example. When I started off in life, I thought, like a good Westerner, that my life was all sort of down to me. So if I made certain efforts, then certain things would happen. And if I did a wrong thing or messed it up, then I could completely mess up my life and everyone else's life. And I lived like that for quite a long time. I think right up until about 32 it was. So it's like you're a separate entity trying to manipulate what's around you. And sometimes I'd fall in love and think, why didn't it happen? Or sometimes it did happen and then it would sort of peter out a little bit down the line. Or even in my working life, I'd want to think I really want to work for that company, and whatever I did, it wouldn't happen. But then what I started to notice was a little further on, something infinitely more suitable would suddenly pop up. And I realised that if the first thing had happened, which I got angry about for not happening, I wouldn't have been available for the real thing when it did appear. And the same with girlfriends. It's like it was the realization that it was so well looking at life from a bigger vantage point. It seemed like an immaculate movie that was unfolding in spite of me, not because of me. And Miranda's question was, I listened again to the talk, it was you can fully understand the idea of a perfectly composed universe, but you wanted to know the role of free will or will within that perfectly composed universe. That was roughly your question. And that has absolutely fascinated me for years and years, that very question. It is a thing of observing life, and if you observe it from a big enough perspective, you don't have to believe me on this one. If your experience is different, that's fine, but observing my life, it's so immaculately arranged, and that includes things like illness and bereavement and redundancy. And they're horrible when they happen, but when you move on a bit, then you see, no, that had to end there, because this other thing came in exactly when I was ready for it a bit further on. So then it's what I call the multi-dimensional cosmic jigsaw puzzle. It's like the cosmic game of checkers going around the other side of the board, but it's such a vast board. It's like this with 7 billion players in it and more. And every player is the one consciousness, but playing the great cosmic game of checkers in forgetfulness of who they really are. So from the point of view of this model and my understanding, every single person is the one mind dancing. So it's like this. Every single action, thought, feeling is all coming down from oneness and creating this huge, great, multi-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. So every thought, feeling, action arises from the same source and is the same thing. And from our perspective, it appears that we're all separate individuals interacting and dancing and meeting and falling in love and quarrelling and lots of other things. But in reality, it's all just oneness meeting itself in this amazingly, immaculately produced movie. And I'm just going to read you something I read before from Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell quotes Schopenhauer, and he says, "That's right. Schopenhauer, in his splendid essay called On an Apparent Intention in the Fate of the Individual, points out that when you reach an advanced age and look back over your lifetime, it can seem to have had a consistent order and plan, as though composed by some novelist. Events that when they occurred had seemed accidental and of little moment turn out to have been indispensable factors in the composition of a consistent plot. So who composed that plot? Schopenhauer suggests that just as your dreams are composed by an aspect of yourself of which your consciousness is unaware, so too your whole life is composed by the will within you. And just as people whom you will have met apparently by mere chance become leading agents in the structuring of your life, so too will you have served unknowingly as an agent, giving meaning to the lives of others. The whole thing gears together like one big symphony, with everything unconsciously structuring everything else." And Schopenhauer concludes that it is as though our lives were the features of the one great dream of a single dreamer, in which all the dream characters dream too, so that everything links to everything else, moved by the one will to life, which is the universal will in nature. It's a magnificent idea, an idea that appears in India in the mythic image of the net of Indra, which is a net of gems, where at every crossing of one thread over another there is a gem reflecting all the other reflective gems. Everything arises in mutual relation to everything else, so you can't blame anybody for anything. It is even as though there is a single intention behind it all, which always makes some kind of sense, though none of us knows what the sense might be or has lived the life that he quite intended.
Which page is it?
Which?
Page.
It's page 147. What I find the advantage of this viewpoint is that automatically this bit settles into its place. So ego, in terms of ego as something separate, goes very quiet, and it's no longer running around thinking it's doing everything and trying to control and manipulate other people. So almost like it settles into its role as the vehicle of consciousness, rather than usurping the role of an apparent doer. In the Ramayana, Hanuman, the monkey, represents the ahamkar, or I, or ego, which knows that it is the vehicle of the Absolute. So after Hanuman's jumped across to Sri Lanka and bashed up all the demons, and then he goes and he rescues Sita, and then he goes back to Rama and tells of all his exploits, and Rama gets a bit worried that Hanuman's ego is getting a bit out of control, but then Hanuman says, I did all of this just using the energy made available by you. And then Rama realised that Hanuman was the devoted servant of the pure ahamkar that knew it wasn't separate. So my experience of seeing everything as a movie and trusting the process is this sense of I amness starts to arise of itself. It's like it starts to just naturally, you notice it, it's always there, but due to identifying with your sense of doership mistakenly with the vehicle, it's possible not to notice this. But the more you realise, from my perspective, that I'm actually, as a small Philip, I'm actually not doing anything at all, and then it's like this, you become much more aware of the great stillness that lies behind it all. It almost arises of itself. And normally at this point people say, but that means I can just stay in bed all day. And the answer to that is yes, you can. But the trouble is you won't be able to if it's not on your particular movie. Try it.
I heard Moody talking about this just yesterday.
Did you?
And he was saying, you have the power to believe in the West that I can do anything, I put my mind to it, I can conquer the world. Because, well, actually, you have the power to start things, but you don't necessarily have the power to complete things. As you say, if it's not in your life path to do X, it just won't complete. It doesn't matter what you say, what you do, that's just how it will be.
Well done, Moody. It does happen a lot in life. I've certainly had it, where you get so excited about something, you go sort of charging off down an avenue, and if it's not actually on your movie, then it's like you just find it's a dead end and it closes up. But it is really on your movie, because it then shows you where your true path is, because you then have to come back, and it almost sort of pushes you back onto your path, going down an avenue that isn't on your path. And there's another lovely story from the Advaita tradition about how in the springtime all the cows and calves are pushed out into the fields because they've been in the stable in the winter. And in the spring they all get pushed out in the field, and all the cows and the calves get mixed up. So what the poor calves have to do is they go from cow to cow, giving it a nuzzle, trying to find their right mother cow. And if it's the wrong cow, the cow sort of gives them a big kick and knocks them away until eventually they find their real cow. And when I don't know what to do, I call it nuzzling cows. So I need to go off and nuzzle a few cows. Which is a way of finding what, because if it's not it applies to anything, not just cows. It applies to jobs or whatever you're doing. You try and do it, and if it's not yours, you just get knocked back. You get given a kick. So it's quite a good metaphor, nuzzling cows. You don't have to agree with this at all.
But he found out because he was desperately trying to chase a woman, and whatever he did, he couldn't get it together with this woman. She just wasn't interested, was she?
No, it didn't happen.
That's what made him realise that he just couldn't manipulate it. She wasn't your woman.
No. And sometimes you get given false leads in the movie. It's almost like something sort of opens up for you. Oh, this is really exciting. Not just women, it could be work or something. it's almost like you get a bit further down the avenue and then it closes up. So it's like you're always being pushed back onto your true path. But if there's one thing I could tell my younger self, if I could go back and tell something to my 18-year-old self, it would be this thing that I've learned. That life is immaculately arranged and you can absolutely trust it. You can so trust it. That's what I would tell myself, because it would have done away with a lot of angst. And it's like, again, you can't miss anything. If something's on your movie, you can't miss it, and it's going to happen. You can't. We had a saying once, you can't get away from it, whatever you do, because it's all in the pattern and so are you. So it's like, it's immaculately composed and you can't mess it up. Whatever you do, you can't mess it up.
So are you saying basically that you don't have any free will then?
I'm sort of saying that. I'm saying there isn't.
Wow.
I'm saying there isn't a separate you. That's why I'm saying you have to answer this question first. Because you say, are you saying you don't have free will? Who is the you? So that's why, first of all, you have to answer the question, who am I? So if in your question of asking who am I, you decide I'm just physical, subtle, then clearly, yes, you do have free will. But if you go further back than that, and then you say, who am I? And you discover that you're more than that, and you discover that you're the one consciousness, then even there, yes, you do have free will as the one consciousness, but not as a separate vehicle.
Sure. Sorry, can you just ask, so how would you approach somebody who, for instance, has a big dream?
A big dream.
A dream, a passion for
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
And they put everything into this
Yeah.
dream or this passion. And they feel really called
yeah,
to I'm thinking about a particular person.
yeah,
And it doesn't manifest.
yeah,
And not because they didn't have the talent, but
Yeah.
because that was taken away from them.
yeah. The talent was taken away.
From this, well, it was basically something happened and
Yeah.
this person wasn't able to,
Yeah,
this man wasn't able to
Yeah.
continue doing what it was that he wanted to do. And so as a result of that, he became a drug addict, an alcoholic. He basically abandoned any other path that he'd been on. Ultimately wanted to not be here, wanted to commit suicide, and then contracted lung cancer. And when he got the lung cancer, he didn't want to die anymore, but there wasn't any great sort of feeling of enlightenment, like, oh, now I understand why this had happened to me in my movie. It was just a really quite a sad departure, and I've never really understood that. Because I always feel there must be a reason for everything, you know. And I know that my experience is my experience, and I can't speak for his experience, because who knows what happened at his moment. Maybe in his moment of death something happened. I don't know. But just as an observer, I just find what you're speaking to is very consoling for me personally, because I can look back at my life in terms of dramas that have happened, of which there've been a number, and I can reframe it, and and it's actually a really great way of explaining it to myself, and actually I can see it for myself. But I just I suppose if I can see it for myself, I see it for myself, and it doesn't really matter.
I think you sort of answered your question, really.
Yeah. Yeah. But the intellect, which is
The intellect,
there,
you have to stick totally with your own direct experience,
yeah,
because you don't know what's going on
for the other
in
person.
another person.
Exactly.
And also, suffering, whether it's physical or psychological, all takes place here, and you don't know the transforming effect on this.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to judge things unless it's actually you who's doing the experiencing. What very often happens in that story is the person has all that great talents, and they have the dreams, and they have the ambition, and then they have the falling to bits, and maybe the suicide attempt, and maybe the drug addiction. Normally something happens, and then they help other people who are going through exactly the same thing. In his case, he didn't have that bit,
No.
but there was probably something else he did have.
I hope so.
It occurs to me that sometimes when something doesn't make sense in that way, in that something that isn't obvious to us but would have been helpful for them or happening for them, is that they're probably some kind of life agent for others, some kind of education or opportunity for others. I mean, so for example, I've come across a number of examples when I was working with ill people, but disabled children, profoundly disabled children who have come, maybe dying to join with God for healing, have been profound agents of love for the family. They're focal points for love that otherwise might not have existed within that unit. And I've seen those families have more love in them than the average, which is quite striking. So it just occurs to me maybe there's some other angles that we don't know, some kind of growth elsewhere that we don't know.
My other experience of it was, I mentioned a friend in the dying talk. She was a really beautiful actress, and then she was here, she was in my group in Collet in the late 80s, and then she developed a brain tumour, and it took about 15 or 16 years to kill her. I used to visit her a lot, and she gradually got more and more paralysed, and that was like she'd been in some great films and things, and I'd seen her at the Old Vic acting, and then it was like, what was the point of that life all closing down? And then she died, and I related the experience I had of when I was in my studio and I didn't know she had died. It was like this thing swept into the room which was now completely free and expanding into everything, and it was almost like, the way I saw it was, she'd gone all through this terrible thing of being contracted in a body, and the body was dying and closing down, and she couldn't move. And suddenly it felt like there was this amazing expansion when consciousness breaks free and becomes universal. And maybe that's partly the point of it.
Well, actually, I personally have an experience when he died. It's funny, it just made me think.
You was a few talks ago. You were saying about bliss and following your bliss, and in your right introduction, you cited bliss as one of the veils. How does that? Is that a contradiction or is it not?
In the Advaita tradition, they have a thing known as the five veils, which, to put it, if I can remember them, there's what's called the food veil, which is Annamaya. Then there's the Pranamaya, which is like the vital sheath, they call it. Then there's Manamaya, which is the manas or the moving mind. Then there's Vijnanamaya, which is the intellectual mind. And then there's Anandamaya, which is the veil of bliss. And in the Advaita tradition, it links in with the teaching of aham and idam. So it's all, some people you're just fully identified with the veil of food, the anamaya, so you see your body as self and everything as other. And then you, with the veils, you gradually go back in the causal chain, disidentifying with each one. And so then you see your body as other, and then you see your manamaya, or your mind, as other, then you see your intelligence as other. And with bliss, it's a difficult one, because most people think they're aiming for bliss, but bliss is still an experience which has a beginning and an end in time. So bliss starts here and it ends there, so it's still a veil. It's still ultimately not the one who witnesses the experience. So what this is all about is noticing that your true identity is not a thing or an experience, but that which witnesses the experience. So in that case, even bliss is, they say, neti, not this, and you go back until you realise that what you are is the great stillness that witnesses everything. That's stage one. Stage two is you then notice that everything you're disidentified with is actually also yourself. So you then discover, having established what your true self is, you then notice that it actually encompasses all the things you're disidentified with. And then from that point of view, there is no aham and idam, there's just aham, there's just everything is I. So that's the role of disidentifying with bliss. But there's two ways. The follow your bliss is a Joseph Campbell phrase, and that's another thing I would tell my younger self, is just follow your bliss. So go for what makes you happy. And then it seems things, if you follow your bliss, go for what makes you happy, your life seems to open out from that. So if you're happy being a great plasterer and bricklayer and everything, follow it, because you're very good at it. But if you want to be something else, then go for it. Because life, the other thing about the dying talk is life is so short. It goes so quickly. 1 minute you're 30, the next minute you're 60, and it goes in an absolute flash. When you're sort of in your 20s, you think it's just going to sort of go on forever, but it just goes so quickly. So if there's something you have a great passion to do, just get on and do it. Don't delay it.
You know, my brother is one of the few people that I know that's actually following his passion.
What's he doing?
So he started out life as a lawyer. He's very sensible in a way. He only ever wanted to be a musician and guitarist since he was 3. He picked up the guitar.
Wow.
That was it.
Yeah.
And he did law for as long as he could bear it, and then he just got out, and he just decided to make his career, and so he ended up being a musician and creating his own guitar school, in spite of the fact that all the family were saying, no, this is so wrong. He still just was determined. I was so impressed. And he now has just bought his second flat with his girlfriend and whatever. And he had I perceived it as being a little gift from life for being one of the people that took the bravery to do that, because on Christmas Day he and his girlfriend went to Heathrow Airport to go to Vietnam, and when he got to the counter they said, congratulations Mr. Tom, you're the 10 millionth visit to Vietnam this year. We'd like to upgrade you to business class. And they're like, oh, okay, fine. So they did that, and they said, would you mind doing an interview when you get there? And he said, okay, fine. So they got to Vietnam, touched down, and when they got out the plane, there was a red carpet, there was a brass band, there was TV crews, there was government ministers, there was a dancing dragon, there's all kinds of things. And, so he was in all national papers for a week.
Wow.
Yeah, but I took it as being that's literally like winning the lottery, really.
Yeah.
But I kind of took it as one of life's way of saying, you did good. I mean, this is my personal thing.
That's really a lovely story, that, because he obviously was a very intelligent fellow, so he could have he had lots of choices as to what to do, because he could have been a lawyer, but he wanted to be a rock and roll guitarist.
Yeah, and he ended up kind of like he ended up creating this guitar school. So he teaches guitars to stressed out executives,
Yeah.
people like that in the city who wants to do the music but couldn't, and then they end up running corporations.
Yeah.
So he's not compromised a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
still, it is his bliss. For him, it's just easy.
Yeah.
Very easy.
Very nice story. In
And
my
he just released an EP last year. Actually.
Wonderful. In my case, I was only ever any good at painting, so I didn't have much choice. We could end it there if you like.
You're a good teacher.
I managed to get through the free will meeting in one piece. Miranda, how did it sound?
It's not quite what I feel to be true, but largely it is. And I feel like we live in paradoxes within paradoxes, and this can't work it out.
We always have to go on our own experience to make sure you follow your
Yes. And I was also thinking that, from the diagram, I can't articulate things quite as well as you do. I tend to see things visually, and it's kind of hard to put it into words. But that if we think about free will being on the physical and subtle level, then you're saying, it's actually everything here that's living through all of us. Then yes, on that level, there is no free will, because it is just the one doing everything. But while you're associated with that level of existence, there is free will, because you're within that.
Yeah.
If that,
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So it's like it's both and,
Yes.
and it's also relative and absolute understandings. So from a relative perspective, we all have free will. But from an absolute perspective, we don't exist as separate entities.
Yes, so there cannot be free will.
So there cannot be free will. So you can have it both ways, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
Can it
Great.
be two ways at the same time?
Yeah, you can look at them both simultaneously.
Okay, for me, it's a little bit like coming to turning. Sort of, there's one part of me that's very rebellious about it, and then there's this other part of me that feels that I have no choice, and I just am compelled. And it's like, so I have the free will not to come, and I choose to come. But I know that if I don't come, I would feel very regretful. So I don't know if that has any kind of parallel.
Yeah.
To
When I used to miss, my first 25 years, I only missed sort of a couple of macabre, and I used to feel so bad if I was somewhere else. And I think, oh no, they're all going upstairs now. What am I doing here?
Sorry, can I just say I didn't want to take time of because this session is for GPs, but something recently I experienced about free will was, I was in pain of what had happened to me, and then I talked to God and I asked God, why this pain happened? It's too much, and then I hear Him in my voice, like in me, saying, "Did you want me to take over? Did you want me to stop it?" And I said no. He said, "Okay, if I stopped it, your development would have finished. The only way you could have developed what you had to be is to go through this. So we can actually give up. To me, is we can give up our free choice, but we won't develop as much. It's exactly like parents. No, if the child do something wrong, the consequence would be something bad. So it's not that the awareness or God, whatever we call, doesn't know, is not aware of the consequence of what we do. Imagine if there are thousands and millions of paths we can take. He knows the consequence of what will happen, but He gives the choice to us to choose each one. And for each one, what we do, we can develop certain amount. To completely develop, we have to go through it ourselves. We can give it up and say, no, it's too much pain. But to go through it completely, we have to go through these pains and choices and ups and downs and all that. So this was my recent experience of free will.
I've never for myself made any choices. I sort of think I do from one side, and when I look back I see it appeared inevitable.
I often feel like if we think of it like a movie, there are things that we could say are inevitable that are part of the movie. But I feel like because we have free will, we can take a major detour. We can take a long time to get there, or we can do it fast and with open arms. So there are certain inevitabilities, but the shape of its unfolding is, well, shaped by our choices and our free will. Sometimes there have been situations in life where it hasn't seemed completely, the outcome hasn't seemed inevitable. It has almost seemed like I've been presented with something, and depending on how I behave, it will go one way or the other. There is something fundamental about it which will not change.
Yeah.
But on the surface, I can take different paths.
And then when you look back at it, were there still multiple paths, or was there just one path?
No, I can think there were ones where there was multiple paths. But at the end of the day, which is huge, it doesn't matter, because you're always going to go through what you need to go through.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about taking detours. And
I think there's something. What I've experienced as I've got older is it's like what Philip read of Schopenhauer. The older you get, the bigger the picture gets. That's the thing that I've experienced about getting older. So you start to see, it's like seeing the bigger picture. And it's quite mind-blowing sometimes when I've stepped back, it's almost like, okay, Helen, get out the way. And suddenly you actually see, it's like seeing more of the painting and go, hey, because somebody you met when you were 10 appears 40 years later, and you think, and I think that's the thing that you can't get until you get older. Should we get? It depends. Are we lucky to get old or not, or are we lucky if we go young? We're not flapping around in the mud, as Ruby says.
For me, there is something to do with truthfulness and being genuine, and it has to do with both seeing things and developing somehow, because it makes you have to see what you're avoiding, and sometimes that's sort of all it takes, is to be truthful about them. But to have this safe space for this to happen, I mean, is a very lucky thing. Because if, for me, from my experience, all of these blocks that are blocking us is just us not seeing things for what they are, and that's it. It just seems sort of that simple. There's a freedom that really comes when there's truthfulness, as much as we are able somehow. Yeah.
Nice. We can carry on next week. We haven't got a theme for next week. Next week's probably the last one. But I'll just read you a little tiny roomy bit from the Mathnavi you should take away with you. Know that true is the text thou didst not throw when thou threwest. Whatsoever the soul soweth is from the soul of the soul. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.